Welcome to OOO, an out of ordinary podcast where we dig deep into case studies and the nitty gritty of Web3 marketing. You'll find here all the amazing people that are building Web3, so stick to us as we address their marketing secrets and learn how to build amazing products and brands. Hello everyone, I'm Alex, your fellow Web3 marketer and the host of Out of Ordinary podcast. This is episode 53. I'm on a mission to make this podcast your go-to place when it comes to answering anything Web3 marketing related. But before I introduce you to my guest, I want to let you know that this podcast episode will be minted. What does this mean? You can collect it on pause.media, link in the description of the episode, and you can win one of the 3 prizes, one of the 3 hoodies, and a one-on-one with the speaker. Besides this, you can always support the show both on Patreon and Unisub with donations in fiat or crypto. And if you can't donate, that's totally fine. Send this podcast episode to a friend, leave a 5-star review, or post about it on social media. Every action matters. Now, let me introduce you to my guest. Eunika Sot joined Outlier Ventures in early 2023 as a marketing advisory manager. She's a Web3 native who started her own company in 2018 and took it through ups and downs of multiple cycles. Her focus at Outlier is helping startups create end-to-end go-to-market strategies that leverage most up-to-date marketing frameworks and cross-disciplinary expertise. She's also a science fiction writer and public speaker featured by Bloomberg, who enjoys ambient techno. Hello, Eunika, and welcome to the Out of Ordinary podcast. How are you today?
Hi, Alexander. How are you? I'm really good, and thank you so much for saying my name properly. I really appreciate that.
So excited.
Eastern European crowd.
Always here to represent. Super happy to have you on the podcast today. And to kind of kick off this episode, would you want to introduce yourself and tell us how you got into Web3?
Sounds good. So, like Alexander said, I'm Eunika Sot. My Web3 journey started quite a while ago. So I've been in the space since about 2017, and I dove straight in. So essentially, I started my own company. So I started by having a company. We were thinking about, launching an ICO, and back in the ICO era, it was all crazy times. But yeah, eventually we ended up not doing it, which is probably for the best. But yeah, my company was called User. It's spelled Y-U-S-E-R. It's just kind of like a weird name. But one of the reasons why I specifically got into Web3 was because I've been kind of you could say, creator of some sort, or, sort of more an artistic side my entire life. And when I started working with a guy who became my co-founder, we were kind of in this weird space where we were trying to create a sort of a publishing website. We were just working on getting a lot of different content creators together, different influencers, and basically had... I don't know if you're familiar with kind of Facebook circa 2015-16 when publishing... I don't know if you want to call it publishing houses, not really, but like publishers such as BuzzFeed became a thing, right? There was a lot of traffic sharing going on through social media, mostly Facebook. So we were kind of in that game for a little while. And we were really trying to essentially do the same thing, but more so for a publication that was more focused on kind of like nerd culture or gaming, doing different reviews and stuff like that. Unfortunately, it was kind of this tail end of that heyday. And no matter what we did, we had deals with influencers that had like 20 million followers on Facebook, and we could not make sort of the ad revenue from these traffic sharing agreements that we've had, which was insane. If you think about bringing, let's say, within a few minutes, you're bringing 3 million people into your website, and you just like make no ad revenue whatsoever. So it was really, really crazy. But essentially from that point on, I moved on into sort of really tracking what was going on with Facebook. And I was able to predict like 6 months in advance that they were going to disallow publishers from Facebook as a platform, which is essentially what they did. So I wrote an article about it. It's kind of up there in the ether that says that this is exactly what Facebook is going to do. And that's kind of how my Web3 journey really started, because I like, this is so unfair. How come there is one sort of overlord sitting somewhere making decisions for millions of people who are, used to certain infrastructure. There's so many businesses that literally collapsed within a day when Facebook made that change eventually. There's never been a day when we got so many emails from like influencers and other people. Are you still hiring? Are you still paying? But by that time we were kind of out of the game. But I just couldn't believe it. That's the one person would have such power, and that people will create entire businesses on the backbone of this type of platform. So I was always super passionate about the kind of monetization for content creators and trying to figure out how they can earn revenue. I think that the internet, although it is a great place, it has also done certain things that are really detrimental to people being able to, make money from their contribution. I mean, you being a content creator probably know that yourself, how difficult it can be to monetize, engagement, monetize traffic. And then once you get to a certain level and you're able to do that consistently, you're on the mercy of the platform. There's many YouTubers that are getting, silenced for various different reasons. There's different accounts that are getting blocked. Like, you essentially have no recourse if a platform decides to do that to you. Right. So that has kind of been my journey into Web3 and trying to figure out not only how on-chain technologies can be good for transfer of value, as in monetary value, but also tokenizing different types of content. And I became really, really passionate about that. And that's kind of what my startup was all about. And then I've done it for about 5 years. And now I'm at Outlier Ventures.
It's always very interesting to see how some people got into Web3. And I think many times I'm being told that people got in because of a friend or because they were there for the money. So I think your story is quite unique. And as you mentioned about like Outlier Ventures, I wanted to ask you, and I've been dying to ask you, what is Outlier Ventures and what is not?
You know what? That is such an interesting question, just because I feel like people always kind of get it wrong. You would think it would be simple. You would think it would be simple, but so many times, when I go and I have Outlier Ventures on a t-shirt and I walk around the conference or something like that, people are like, Ventures, that means you're a fund. Well, I'm going to disperse to admit we're not a fund. We invest in companies, but in order to kind of become part of Outlier Ventures family, you have to join one of our programs. So Outlier Ventures is a Web3 Startup Accelerator. We're the biggest Web3 Startup Accelerator in the world, according to Messari data. We've supported I think its number is hitting 300 right now, startups over the years. So we are also pretty much the most active investor in Web3 in last year. So supporting startups all the way through the bear market, all the good vibes. Still, trying to we are very, very passionate about the space and making sure that companies can flourish even in the sort of down cycles. So we're very proud that we were able to do that. But essentially, for if any founders are listening, in order to join Outlier Ventures, you have to apply to one of our active programs and then go through the entire process of having like a tech deep dive and all different assessments of of your product and whether you're ready to kind of be in this type of accelerator program, and then you're able to join. We were getting more and more applications. We've been around for quite a while, so it is a quite stiff competition, but it also means it's quite prestigious if founders get in. But we offer a very structured 3-month program, and we have pretty much the best and the brightest in the industry on our team. So we have internal product and engineering team. We have a token team. I'm myself on the marketing team. But specifically dealing with Web3 founders and Web3 startups, not more on an outlier side. So we have also legal help. So if we cannot help you, we know somebody who will. So we are able to take founders throughout this 3-month-long program. Where we really assess them on all different levels, and then we eventually we have a demo day where they're able to pitch investors in our network and close the rounds, open the rounds, that's essentially kind of like the starting point to becoming part of Outlier Ventures family.
Something else I wanted to ask you, and I think would be very important to kind of clear things out. First of all, you have like 2 accelerator programs, right? If I'm not mistaken. Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because our main program is the Basecamp program. It's very structured. It's 3 months, but then we also have Ascent program, which is probably what you're referring to, right?
Yes. The question was actually, what are these 2 doing, and what kind of startups can they get in? Because I know one of them is in partnership with Wormhole. I know Wormhole does something very technical in my understanding, because I've been digging a bit into them like recently, and I was like, oh my god, this is super technical. I really need to pay attention to what I'm reading right now. So that was the question, like, what are these 2 programs doing? How are they different? And what kind of startups are they targeting, first of all?
So let me backtrack a little bit, because it's a little bit more complicated now that I realize when I hear a question. So we have the Basecamp program, which is the 3-month structured programs, like I mentioned, for startups. Then we have our Ascent program, which is specifically for token launch. Those are very bespoke engagements that we do with startups who are ready to launch their token. And we have a very, very world-class token engineering team that is able to help teams of all sizes with their tokenomics. We even have companies that are post-token launches, and they want to revise certain things that have to do with their tokenomics and stuff like that. So these guys are always happy to help. But when it comes to Basecamp, there's various different streams. So right now, for example, we are actively recruiting for 3 different programs. One of them is focused on AI. Another one is focused on real world assets. And we have DPN as well. So those are the ones that are in open recruitment, so that if, any founders out there in those areas specifically, you can go and apply. However, currently, we have also 3 programs that are running, and the programs that are running, one of them is Wormhole. So this is a program that we run in partnership specifically with Wormhole, and it's focused on the cross-chain thesis. So it supports startups that are very committed to making their applications and their infrastructure multi-chain. So this is essentially one of our streams right now. However, we also have 2 other streams that are active. One supporting the Bitcoin ecosystem, which we're super excited about because there's a lot of growth happening within Bitcoin. And also our 3rd program is in partnership with Futureverse. So those are startups that are a little bit more focused on things like GameFi, for example. But we're essentially the way the Basecamp programs work is that we have a kind of thesis that we think sort of supports our open metaverse thesis that we've published quite a while ago, and we just kind of break it down to different segments that are there, focused on specific areas and supporting founders in those areas that we believe are going to really move the technology forward. So some of those are working with partners such as Wormhole, or we also had different partners kind of more on the enterprise side, I would say. Like in last year, we had a program with Store Number 8, that is an innovation arm of Walmart. So that was more kind of like a stream focused on decentralized commerce. And when we bring these partners on board, then we're able to kind of decide with them what are different areas of Web3 that we want to support. So with Wormhole, it is a kind of cross-chain, multi-chain thesis. With some of the other ones, it's focused on something else, such as GameFi, SocialFi, or real world assets, for example. I hope that adds a little bit more clarity.
Yes, this is much more clear, at least for me, so I hope for the audience as well. So this was just the first part of the question. The second part of the question was like, how do this accelerator program specifically cater to the needs of these startups? Maybe you can name a few. Tell us like what the startups, why the startups need this accelerator programs, and what lessons have you learned from working with this founders or their teams?
So just the first part of this question, I would say that the Basecamp program is very, very structured. Very often we have founders come on board and they think that it's going to be sort of like other accelerator programs where they maybe have a couple of workshops or a couple of calls and somebody to talk to once in a while, and that's it. that is not Basecamp. It is another full-time job on top of your full-time job as a founder. It's very intense. So first of all, we have to make sure that the founders, the teams are able to handle this level of extra work, because we essentially accelerate you on all different verticals of your business. We have help, like, I mentioned, on the engineering side, on the token side, on the marketing side. We are able to bring people who are more focused on sales and BD into these conversations. You also have direct sessions with your PM, your program manager, and your program associate, who's there with you all the way. And when I was a founder, I actually went through the Basecamp program with my company. So I kind of have this experience, being a founder and kind of knowing exactly what Basecamp is about for founders, but also being on the other side, where, I coach the founders now and try to kind of offer them as much help throughout these 3 months. So one thing that I think what I've learned quite a bit in this process is that a lot of founders will kind of, even at conferences, tell me, "Oh, I think I'm too late. I think I'm too late for the program." I'm very skeptical when founders say it. I think that I would encourage everybody who thinks, especially that they're too late, to apply, because I think it is a very value-add process, even the whole application process. Folks at Outlier, they take it very, very seriously. We have the entire tech kind of review process, where they have calls with different people from the team, and they're able to assess your business in various different verticals. So even that process itself is very helpful to startups, I find. And then, plus if you get into the program, then you get so much support in all these different areas. So that is kind of, I think, where most of the value add throughout the program comes in. And then, essentially towards the end of the program, you also get a lot of support in making sure that you can do best with your pitch leading up to the demo day. And we are able to bring hundreds of investors into the room with you so that they can listen to your pitch and then express their interest. And we can do a little bit of a matchmake. So it's very, very valuable to startups to basically participate in this kind of process. And I'm not sure if I answered the second part of your question, or maybe you can repeat it.
It was about the what kind of lessons have you learned from working with these participants?
I'm trying to. I kind of feel like every founder, every startup sort of teaches you something new, and when you're working with them so directly, it's almost like it's kind of like a back and forth process, right? I think it's. I'm trying to. Sorry. See what I said about me coughing?
That's totally fine. Don't worry about it.
It's like a thing that I cannot stop. I should go to a doctor and be like, why can I talk properly? I don't know. But just in general, I feel like one of the things that I learn from founders every day is sort of the level of resilience that they have. I've done this for 5 years. And part of the reason why I decided to move on is because I had a son, and I was just like, I just can't do it. So, but I see women founders in our programs all the time who have children, and I'm just like, I am so proud of how they can do it. It's amazing to watch. But then people are in various different kind of stages of their life, and they're putting in so much of themselves into their startups, into this journey. So I feel like that is one thing that is just in my opinion sort of unbelievable, how much time they can kind of spend and how much energy they can give to create something new and really just showcase sort of their expertise to the world. So I feel like working for Outlier Ventures and working with the founders, no day is ever the same and no day is ever boring. But I'm trying to think, do you want me to kind of give a particular shout out to some of the startups that I work with in the past year?
All right, let's take a quick break and introduce you to a game changer in the lead generation arena, Dealfront. Now, we all know the struggle of identifying those elusive website visitors and turning them into valuable leads. But what if I told you there's a tool that not only promises, but delivers on supercharging your lead generation and sales efforts? Imagine having the power to identify companies visiting your website, track their behavior in real time, and seamlessly integrate it all with your CRM. Dealfront is not just a tool, it's your secret weapon for efficient and targeted lead engagement. So what sets it apart? Its revenue engine is fueled by live European data in multiple languages, providing you with insights and access that other tools simply can't match. No more struggling to find the right decision makers. With Dealfront, it's as easy as a few clicks. Here's the magic. With Dealfront, you can harness 3 layers of data: market signals, web visitors, and EU company databases. And there's no need to worry about compliance. Dealfront meets Europe's strict standards, ensuring GDPR compliance competitors simply can't match. Ready to revolutionize your approach to leads and deals? Grab your free demo today at dealfront.com. That's DEALFRONT.com. Don't miss out on the future of successful deal making with Dealfront. I mean, like whatever you want, but if you want, we can also continue the conversation, because I think like this question is kind of related to what I just asked you as well, and it's regarding like their biggest struggles and the differences between like what you're seeing between like companies that are targeting like B2B audiences and B2C. And if you want here, you can also give a shout out to some of the companies that you work with and you think like they're worth mentioning.
Sure. So it's very interesting that you break down kind of the biggest struggles based on the sort of segment, if they're B2B or B2C, because I do think though that those journeys are quite different. From my perspective, nobody talks about
them in Web3. Everybody talks about it in Web2.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I find that here's when we specifically discuss Web3 companies and the B2B segment, a lot of kind of very early stage infrastructure projects in Web3 are very heavily kind of community focused. Creating a giant community is something that they all want. However, if you think about it, those are projects that kind of come out from this sort of open source ethos. A lot of them, because they have very robust tokenomics, they need to kind of play this sort of numbers game when it comes to community and rile the troops, so to speak, as much as possible. However, what I've been seeing over the last couple of years, there's more and more straight up B2B companies in Web3, companies who are able to offer sort of infrastructure level services, open APIs to other businesses. And it's just sort of very interesting to me to see these companies come on board and like, we have to create a giant community. I'm like, no, you need to direct sales. So it's this kind of misunderstanding of, being a Web3 company does not automatically mean that you need to have a giant community and that this is what you need to do. But at the end of the day, a lot of companies, they still want to do it. They're like, we have no plans for a token. We're not going to run our Discord, but we want a community. I'm like, So I feel like this kind of misconception about exactly what your business model is much more kind of noticeable in Web3. So a lot of what I try to do is to try to kind of educate the founders that have this business model that actually, if you think about it, it's much easier to be a B2B company. So part of the reason for that, it's because if you think about direct sales, you are able to hire a really good salesperson that you're able to train in the core tenets of the business, and they can go and do a lot of direct sales, bring in, like medium-sized businesses or enterprise clients. And those are big ticket sizes, right? So even if you're able to bring in a couple of those types of clients, you can usually show a certain level of traction. They can use your infrastructure, your API, and then you can have much easier time closing your round. Whereas when you are a B2C company, you're playing essentially a numbers game, right? You're trying to get as many users as possible to kind of use your product, and it becomes much harder to demonstrate traction for any type of investor. So essentially, if you're going to have these very early stage investors in kind of the B2C segment, they have to absolutely believe that the founders are capable of delivering this type of product to the masses. And unfortunately, there are not that many applications that are able to make it, because it is such a hard journey. This is why I have like the utmost respect for anybody who's able to bring kind of a B2C product to market and achieve like a consistent levels of scale, because it is a journey that I was on myself, and it is extremely hard. So I kind of understand that that struggle and kind of what happens there. And there's different sort of nuances to creating community that kind of sometimes only become apparent once you make certain decisions, and unfortunately, it's very difficult to undo them.
As a marketing advisory manager at Outlier Ventures, how have you experienced? How has your experience in crypto since? Oh my God, I can't even read this question. um, how? So you're right now working for Outlier
Yeah.
Ventures. How has your past experience and being a startup founder for 5 years shape your approach to supporting the startups in the Web3 space?
That's a really interesting question. I think first of all, compassion, because I've been there. Whenever founders tell me like, I only slept 4 hours last night, and I'm super big. Like I'm never like mad or pissed or anything that they can't do something. Like I've been there. You get such enormous level of work, and you're essentially every single person in your company. It's it is very, very challenging task. So I think that just being understanding is something that founders will naturally have. That being said, you also kind of know the opposite, and you understand no excuses, and you know who's making excuses. So I think in general, bringing this kind of founder experience and knowing kind of more naturally who's really, really trying hard, I think it's much easier, because I guess I'm looking at all these founders through the filter of myself being a founder for many years. So I think that just gives me sort of a unique perspective. And that's what I like to start with as well. Like whenever I talk to startups, I like to, whenever I talk to founders, I like to kind of preface this, listen, I've been a founder. I know what you're going through. Tell me, lay it on me. I like to be able to kind of give them tools that are able to make their work much easier. So I'm a really big nerd when it comes to some like operational stuff. So I really like to like make different spreadsheets or different, kind of like content planners or different tools using Notion that they can just then use to export, and they don't have to start from scratch. Because when you're just starting as a very early stage startup, very often you don't have these things in place. You don't have your HubSpot. You don't necessarily have your Notion. So those are the kinds of things that, like, as you scale, it's very important to sort of use to keep track of different things that are happening in the company. So I like to be able to help founders with that and kind of avoid the little bit of the cold start problem what they have, where they have to have somebody who's just solely focused on creating these systems. Because I find that once like I was able to create these types of templates, I can just explain how they work and they can start using them for themselves. So I feel like for me, it took a very, very long time for when I was running my startup to get to the point where I was able to kind of confidently say that this is what we're tracking and how we're tracking it. So I'm hoping that I can save some of that time for quite a few companies.
But I don't know how it is your experience, but from what I've seen working with startups, mostly in Web2, is that everybody just works their way to exhaustion and to burnout in a very short amount of time, because some people just like to show that they're working so much, and some of them they're workaholics and they don't know when to stop. And I feel like your comment regarding being very empathetic is comes in handy, but at the same time, I also know there's like if you flip the coin, you see that some people don't even know exactly when to stop, or like not exactly when to stop, because obviously, like when you're building something, it's very important to keep going, but it's also how to take care of yourself and to make sure that you're going to be there for the long run.
Yeah. I think that from my perspective, just, working with startups, even right now in the program, I feel like, you can spot the sort of signs of burnout quite easily. There are certain situations in absolutely I'm able to spot it. And, usually I'm able to kind of talk to them or reach out to one of their program associates and say, listen, like, I think they need to take care of themselves as well. So I think that it's a fine balance, right, between managing something that's you're still able to handle versus things getting out of hand. Unfortunately, very often it's the situation where like they think that if they stop, then nothing is going to get done, nothing's going to happen. And it happens very often when their fundraising rounds are not progressing as fast as they would want to. That's when I feel like, a lot of challenges tend to occur, because the money gets very, very tight for some of these founders in those situations. And then things can kind of get out of hand because they're just blaming themselves. And I think that it is, in those situations, it's important to take a step back, but it's also important to start prioritizing what it is you're doing, because it's very easy as a founder with many different things that you're doing every single day to do things that you want to do, things that you like to do, and not do the things that are actually moving the needle, that are hard, because you still are doing work. You're doing so much work. And, because there's never a situation in which everything is done. Sometimes you just have to get better at kind of prioritizing things and saying no to stuff as well. So I think that is another thing that some founders are a little bit better at naturally, and some they need a little bit of like talking to and having a conversation. Like, listen, we see that this is really important. You're doing great in those areas. Focus, double down, delegate wherever you can, or just make sure that these things are not going to get done. And don't be afraid to say no. Because like I also said, Basecamp is a very intense process. We give you a lot, but we also require a lot of the founders. So there are situations when founders can get quite overwhelmed, and then they have a little bit of a struggle. But that being said, I don't think that those are kind of like I don't think there's like that many cases usually. But there's here and there where we have to manage expectations. And I especially want to give shout out to some of our program associates, which are just extremely good at spotting the signs of burnout, and jumping in and saying, listen, if you can't do it, I'm going to help you. And, there's been so many situations where they just essentially acted as another person on staff to be able to kind of help out and finish up a project, especially right now when we're getting very close to the demo day. The time can also get quite tight, because on top of everything else they are doing with their product, they also have to make sure that their pitches are perfect.
For sure, there's a lot of pressure. Something I wanted to ask you was like, how big are these companies that are getting into your acceleration programs, and do you maybe have some successful go-to-market strategies that you have seen and you think you can share with us today?
So the first question as to the size of the companies is honestly super varied. Like, we have companies that are all the way from like usually. Maybe not a solo founder. We prefer there to be at least two people in the company. But yeah, we have a few companies that are just two people starting out very early, and probably pre-launch at that point in time, and then all the way to companies that have up to 15, 20 people. So it really is largely dependent on kind of like many, many factors. I feel like it's also dependent a little bit more on sort of the niche of the company as well. Whether they're kind of more focused on, like, let's say, growing community and stuff like that. And within those companies, like, you need to have a little bit bigger team, because it's very difficult for just like one person to manage that, while managing things like, development and things like this. Whereas I feel like if we talk about companies that just are like two founders working away, those tend to be a little bit more like infrastructure projects that are just starting out. And they're just building their APIs, and they're building the protocols. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
What are some go-to-market strategies that you think you seem to be successful? Because I also know like Web3 is very volatile, and it also depends on the market sentiment, and maybe what worked like a year ago doesn't work as well right now. So I wanted to see what's your take on this, and if you have any good stories that you want to share.
That's a very interesting question. I feel like one thing that I try to teach founders very early on in Basecamp is that go-to-market is very unique to your product and to your company. However, each founder can kind of help themselves by being a certain type of founder. So one thing that I try to kind of communicate with founders very early on is specifically related to making sure that they have their own social presence, that they are being perceived as thought leaders, that they are out there. When it comes to sort of the like sharing expertise in content creation, a lot of people have very kind of on and off enthusiasm to those things. And I feel like people who are consistently being able to deliver every single day are the ones that are actually making a change. But for some founders, this comes kind of naturally, being able to do that. For some founders, this is not. This is something that they have to like fight against, because they're really resistant to kind of like putting themselves out there. But in my opinion, if you are able to have any sort of level of following within, social media, or just in general have your voice heard and have the sort of level of audience, you can you have a few advantages. Like one of them is you're able to iterate much faster, and you already have a pool of people that are going to tell you if your product is shit. So I think that is something that's really important, having this kind of a very fast cycle, like feedback loop that you're able to instill. So my recommendation is always there. When it comes to like successful go-to-market for specific companies, again, we can, like I said, it's very company specific. However, it is also more sort of like segment specific, how we were diving into the B2B and B2C, right? So kind of more on sort of the B2C side, I feel like, B2D, like trying to get a community and developers and everybody involved. I feel like being sort of present on social media and kind of utilizing some of these more sort of Web3 native strategies, I feel like this is something that I am really, really bullish on, especially when the companies know exactly who their audience is and exactly how they can target them, or how they will not target them. Because very often for founders of early stage startups, what tends to happen is that they will want to attract everybody into their product. And that is kind of like the factor of them not having developed a very strong narrative, right? So they will just go out there, shoot messages, all sorts of different type of channels, trying things out, without sort of understanding exactly who their audience is and how to target them. And I find that this has very kind of like limited effect. So I think it's very important to sort of get your story straight, get your channels in order to understand where your audience really is, and double down on that. And I in particular like to see any sort of Web3 native marketing strategies that then in turn leverage some of the tools that are not present in Web 2. So especially for creating communities, this is kind of what I like to see. It's interesting because I was talking recently to somebody, I think it was one of the founders, about like Blur and Blast. And I think that, like, I don't know if you remember that when Blur launched quite a while ago, they had there was this entire like outrage from all the artists about, them not even displaying art properly. Everything is super tiny, and like this is the worst platform for artists and all that kind of stuff. And there were so many artists, like NFT artists, that were complaining about this incessantly. And I was like, you're just doing them a favor, because it's exactly what they want. Blur is not a platform for NFT artists, it's a platform for traders. And you just did them a giant favor by like basically letting everybody know that this is a place for traders, and it all focused on trade. But they leverage the communications from NFT artists being pissed off. So that's what I mean about like knowing who you can piss off and who is your audience versus who is not. And I feel like the founder has kind of repeating the same pattern with the launch of Blast. It's again just having a situation where everybody just keeps talking about the fact that like there's not even an L2. We are just dropping money into this one wallet. Like, how is this going to be anything? But then everybody keeps complaining about it. But it's like, in my opinion, this is sort of the same situation where everybody just keeps talking about not understanding if you're complaining about this is not a platform for you. It's sort of a protocol for degens, and they will be the ones doing this kind of stuff and putting their money into somebody's strange wallet and complaining that they lost it maybe. So really understanding your audience and who you're targeting, as well who you're not targeting, in my opinion, is kind of the difference between making it or not. Because in this sort of situation, as you can see, it's not only that they're leveraging the communication for their audience, but also for who they are not. So they're able to double down and get two groups of people kind of fighting over something and creating a lot of conversation. So I like that example because I feel like it's just very, very stark. Whereas most companies are not really leveraging this kind of discourse to that extent. So I'm not saying just, do exactly the same thing what like Blur and Blast are doing, but I'm just saying that understand who your audience is and who your audience isn't, so that you can leverage the conversation that they will have amongst another, fighting a little bit and kind of creating that conversation. I think this is a bit more sort of on the B2C and B2D side. When it comes to B2B companies, in my opinion, the kind of go-to market tends to be much more sales focused. So again, understanding, that if you're just going to go after that awareness bit, you'll probably not be able to close direct sales right off the bat. But then it is much easier for you to bring somebody who's focused on direct sales and use that very classic kind of B2B sales model that you see in Web2. And there's no need to kind of reinvent the wheel, so to speak, to the same extent, I think. Yeah.
It's kind of I really enjoyed what you said, and I feel like I feel the urge to kind of point out 3 things that I've learned from what you just answered. One, there's nothing you need to dox yourself, like you cannot like be anon anymore. 2, there's your product is not for everybody in crypto, as I see a lot of founders that tell me this. And the third one is, I think the example that you gave with this, I don't know if it was a PR campaign, because I've never heard of like what they did, but I think a lot of times it's somehow sounds like a PR stunt. And from all the companies, like all the companies that are doing PR for like other companies in Web3, everybody, I was even talking to the other day at at East Bucharest with one of the people in my panel, because he was like, well, we do this. And like, I think for your podcast, like, I wouldn't recommend any PR, but I'm like, I would look for something more interesting than just a press release. So like you, because you've been doing it like so much and you've been doing engagement farming and you have so much experience with like boosting products in all sorts of ways, like you should come up with an idea and tell me like, hey, Alex, this would be such a great idea. And not just for me, but like for anybody that would come and work with you, right? Like otherwise, like PR, just to send up press releases, it's a total waste of money. So
yeah, I 100% agree with you. I honestly could not agree more, because I see founders making this mistake all the time, like wanting PR too early. Okay, PR is all about telling a story. You need to have your narrative straight. You need to know what your hook is. You need to understand not only what is the kind of features of your product, but what impact they have on your audience. And it's about creating a certain type of feeling in your audience. Going back to the examples that I just gave you, having this kind of conversation created is about pissing some people off and making some people very happy. And then them having, this kind of sort of clash. You can do that in various different ways, in various different means. You can make people really, really happy. You can make them laugh. You can just do something goofy. I feel like this is why memes tend to, get a lot of traction and be used as a sort of a legitimate strategy these days. If you are going to go to journalists, if you're going to go to PR companies, you have to have your story straight, your narrative straight. You have to know how you're creating emotions in minds of your target audience. And that way you can sort of leverage this for any type of communications. Like, first of all, journalists are not really interested in your product feature launches or anything like this. They're interested in the impact it has on, society, certain communities, and they want to tell that story. So, just paying for press releases, I feel like although there's time and place for that, I really think that it's going to have much more arms and legs if you're able to tell that story very well first. So that's why for very early stage startups, I would not recommend going to PR straight away, just figuring out what the narrative is, what is the story that you're telling. If you're already able to tell it to a certain extent on social media and you see that people are vibing with certain narrative, then you can kind of try to figure out how you can approach media with that, and maybe they can amplify it in some fashion. I also have usually try to recommend that founders go after earned media, much more than paid media, because although it is much harder, it takes much more time, it is also a certain level of validation that you are able to actually get other people interested in what it is that you're building because it has some sort of impact. So it's always about that impact that you're creating.
Something else I wanted to ask you is regarding like the lessons you've learned leading your own company, and how do you integrate that at Base?
Mm-hmm. So there's obviously sort of a lot of lessons learned, like when you're running a startup. I think that are mostly related to prioritization, and then again spotting the people who are able to prioritize things a little bit better versus people who are not. So I think that having this kind of founder experience just gives me a little bit of an edge in that I am able to a little bit better spot who's sort of struggling maybe and who's, crushing it and doesn't have that much of an issue right now, mostly related to like bandwidth constraints and things like of that nature. So I definitely feel like having that experience. Additionally, when it comes to marketing, I've pretty much figured out everything marketing wise and how to bring a product to market myself just by learning every single day on how to do it. So I think that, whenever I hear founders, I don't have any marketing experience. Well, you're about to have all the marketing experience that you need, right? Like that's why we're all here. So I think that pretty much everything that I've learned in my years as a Web3 founder is kind of applicable to what I do right now, which is essentially passing on that knowledge to other founders. And also, I think one thing that's important to point out that is really important to have people in your team that take accountability for various things. Like I think sometimes when you have just a couple of founders working on something, I think the lines can get a little bit blurred, especially if you have, for example, 3 engineers and they're all working on the product together, and who's also taking fundraising, who's also taking marketing, who's also taking business development. Like, you know what I mean? So having these kind of lines drawn early on, there's not going to be a situation usually that early where you're able to bring in people to fill in all these roles. So setting these expectations straight and asking the founders, like, listen, somebody has to take this on. They need to be accountable for it. Who's that going to be? Who has a bit of an edge in that area? Because essentially we all have to kind of become jack of all trades when as founders. So even though people are just engineers, like, newsflash, you are a founder now, you're not just engineer. So therefore you have to usually pick up slack and learn all these different new skills that are related to running a business.
I do actually have 2 questions here. Like, one is very quick. Do you think, would you have preferred to learn these lessons working for a company or as a founder?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. I guess it's kind of hard to know because I did it as a founder, so I don't really know what the other side would be like, I've done marketing for companies before. I think part of the reason why I ended up in Web3 is because of the different type of culture. So I think, learning all that stuff from like a big Web3 marketing company and working for them would have been probably nice, but I don't think that's where we are in terms of industry. So I would have probably had to like learn all of this stuff while working for a Web2 company. And that's what I found for myself. Like a lot of the companies that I worked for, they just were not the right cultural fit. I think that there is much more sort of a level of ownership that you're able to assume in Web3, and people kind of expect you to do that, and which I prefer, and I thrive in this kind of environment. Whereas I cannot stand just kind of this, you have to be there at this time, clocking in, clocking out, micromanaging, no, we're not, this is how we did things for 10 years, we're not changing, like that kind of stuff, it was not the right environment for me. So I don't know if I would have, been thriving in this type of environment. And, perhaps, there's various different companies. Some of them approach innovation a little bit differently. So perhaps this is just related to kind of my experience. But I think that kind of the journey that I've been on has been quite a good one, and definitely illuminating one.
I think I'm asking mostly from the perspective that, like, a lot of companies in Web3, I don't like to say this a lot, but I feel the need to say this because it's not being called out many times. I feel like a lot of products in Web3 are made by men for men, and therefore, like, a lot of the culture is being built in that sense. And many times you would see these founders looking for marketers with, like, experience of having been working all the time, 12 hours a day, having taken a product to market that got like millions of users and so on. And obviously not everybody had that chance. Not many women had that chance, especially because, like, working for very technical products or gaming and so on, it's a bit more difficult to understand because you haven't done that ever since you were a kid compared to, like, men. So I feel like there are a lot of, like, narratives there, and sometimes I'm really wondering, like, is this for real? Is this where we're going, or will things will change moving forward as the art industry matures?
Maybe just a couple of things on that. It's sometimes hard to I feel like people with different skills are suited for different stages of the kind of life cycle of the company. And when it comes to being an early hire in one of these companies, you really need to be jack of all trades. I think it's quite unfortunate that there's not more women that are able to kind of put in this sort of, for various different reasons, what it takes to kind of build themselves up in that capacity. And that is a sort of another story. But I think that if you are bringing somebody on board who has a very specialized experience in sort of the marketing area, and they might be absolutely crushing it as like a analyst, for example, or just somebody who's super experienced with content strategy only, like, those are kind of very specialized skills that I think that people with those skills thrive on bigger marketing teams. However, that is not what's needed for early stage startup. You need somebody who, again, is able to kind of figure things out as they go along, pick up slack in all the various different areas. You can't just hire somebody who is only wants to do content strategy, or they only want to do analytics, or they only want to do X, Y, and Z specifically, marketing related for the company, because that's not what they're going to end up doing. So most of the time, you unfortunately have to find somebody who already has a proven track record of being able to pick up slack. And I think that I don't like when I see this kind of messaging. The only people that we're hiring is people who are able to bring a product and have it achieve crazy levels of scale and being launched to like millions of people. First of all, like, that's not Web3. Like, hello, there's the actual number of people on chain is still pretty low. So I feel like that's a bit unrealistic. That being said, there's also a lot of things that, like, if you want to bring somebody like this on, what are you prepared to pay them? Because newsflash, they're probably not going to go for, a subpar pay, because they are a very experienced person and they're far and few in between. So the only companies, in my opinion, that are able to bring those types of people on are the ones that have raised huge amounts of money, or the ones that are really crushing it when it comes to the culture. Because if you have the right culture, then you can offer somebody just, a little bit lower pay, but they are really wanting to be there because of certain levels of FOMO. Other than that, like startup founders or anybody, they can say whatever they want. That's not who they're going to hire at the end of the day. And maybe this is their kind of like public facing narrative to build themselves up a little bit. But I also wouldn't be deterred from that as a woman. So that's maybe another message for just specifically for all the women out there. when you see this kind of messaging, don't think that's not for you, because that is another thing that I see on the other side. I've been there myself. I've questioned myself so much to death, being like, I read this job description. I'm like, can I ever do it? And I had to stop, because it's kind of like this self-sabotage thinking when you just think that you're not good enough for something. And then once you go out there, you talk to people, you figure out, actually, you know what? I do know it. I do know what I'm talking about. So I think it's also, I think more women should really take a step of putting themselves out there and not believing this kind of self-sabotaging voice that they're not good enough and they're not able to compete in this market. Because I will tell you for a fact that job descriptions can say whatever they want. And most of the time, people that get hired, like, it's not the people who clock in all the different things on the job description. I think that it's important to kind of structure your approach properly. I think it's important to develop your networks. I think it's important to talk to the right people. And that is also kind of like, we are all, in essence, our own sort of the BD person of our life, right? So I feel like people who are able to really thrive, not only in Web3, but just across various different industries, are the ones who treat it as such and are able to kind of go out there and put themselves out there and make their voice heard. And I think the good things will come to you.
I love this. Something else I wanted to kind of continue the conversation, because if we stay on the subject, I think it's a never-ending subject. I know you guys at Outlier Ventures, you focus on emergent open metaverse use cases, such as NFT-based play-to-earn games or augmented reality. What potential do you see moving forward in these areas? Because I do have a very mixed opinion about it, but I'm really curious to see like what you think. And how are you guys supporting the startups to explore these use cases?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because of kind of there's multiple layers in there. The way I think about sort of VR and AR enabled technologies that support sort of the metaverse use cases is that the one thing that people are not really talking as much as they should is the hardware component. When I see companies that are launching something that is going to be used for a piece of hardware that might or might not come out at this time, and then nobody still owns it and stuff like, it's very hard to assess the actual market appetite, in my opinion. So what I like to see is companies that are able to kind of understand how the roadmap looks like in terms of integrating with some of these, wearable tech that's, up and coming, but they also are realistic in terms of the product they're bringing to market right now. So I'm particularly interested in the companies that have products that are able to work in synergy with technology that's being in use today, and they're able to kind of, MVP it in some capacity earlier on. And one kind of example that comes to mind to sort of bring home is maybe something like Pokemon Go, even where we know that it would be so cool to use something like that, through some sort of AR style goggles. However, it worked really well on phone with just your camera. So I think these kinds of things, different types of filters, or I feel like even it has to do with maybe more sort of Web3 use cases, like the wearable tech. No, wearable like NFT fashion, you know what I mean? Those kinds of things. Like, I think that if they are able to still work with technology that we have today, and the companies are able to bring these products to market as some sort of MVP, but they're also then able to use their kind of like journey and their growth in that space to have direct relationship with hardware manufacturers and figuring out how this technology can be used in the future, and what kind of capacity it needs to have in order for it to be as useful, as spectacular as possible. I think that's what sort of excites me the most, because I just struggle a lot talking to startups that pitch something which works for something that like nobody has tried yet, like, for example, the Apple Vision Pro, it's, I know it's launched, but like how many people even have that right now? I think it's important to plan for the future, but at the same time, remember where we are today and remember that we have certain limitations, like, internet that keeps dropping all the time, and that is one conversation that, I've had quite a lot. When I was running my startup, we talked a lot about trying to run some different types of activations with NFT style content at various different events, for example. And that was one of the conversations that we've had. But we realized very, very fast that the limitation was the sort of cell networks. That's why we were really excited about 5G and running some of the tests on 5G networks, because, when you are like at a music festival, for example, or in different places where you have a lot of people kind of congregating, the internet connection tends to be super splotchy, and try to do things that have to do with like NFT drops or different types of additional like VR or AR enabled activations. It's very hard where you already cannot run at like a full network capacity, because there's so many people that are trying to get access to the same network. So you really need to kind of keep in mind some of those limitations of sort of also the hardware, unfortunately.
How do you guys plan to stay ahead and basically help the startups that are going through your accelerators? Because I'm thinking that you're going to be running a couple of the more of them in this bull run, and I was just wondering like how you planning to stay ahead and like basically help these companies be more out there, because obviously the bull run is always a great opportunity to grow if done right. So what are you guys planning there?
So I think sort of on more like Outlier Ventures side, we're really committed to supporting startups that are emerging in various different areas that are currently being talked about and are, very, very, very topical. One area which I feel is still very kind of nascent, but at the same time very interesting, is sort of this crossover between AI and crypto. So that is one of the programs that we're launching. There's a lot of talk again about the real world assets or sort of deeping and like that kind of infrastructure. So I think that supporting sort of the new narratives within the space has been very important to us, and kind of understanding where the industry is heading and just sort of being one step ahead. Because I think that that to me is something that it is going to move the needle for a lot of these startups. It's funny because even a few months ago, nobody had like Deepin was not a category. I mean, obviously Filecoin has been around for quite a while. There's other different projects that are kind of marrying a sort of hardware and infrastructure with some decentralized technologies as well. But I feel like there's all these different sort of categories that are emerging, that are moving the conversations forward. So from our perspective, it's very important to produce a lot of sort of valid research in that area and figure out where the industry is heading and support the founders that are building those categories.
What are you most bullish in this bull run?
So I know that we spent quite a bit of time in the beginning talking about my kind of social media roots. So maybe we can touch a little bit about that. I've been quite present on Farcaster, and I think part of the reason is that I'm trying to manifest myself not being on Twitter. So that's why I want to just like Farcaster, so I can actually just like delete my Twitter account. I honestly hated Twitter from the day that I signed up for it for various reasons. I just never felt very intuitive to me. For whatever reason, I became sort of good at it through necessity, just running my own company and stuff like that. But I think that I would really like to see a lot more sort of social layers that are using decentralized technologies. Again, going back to some of the kind of content creation, basically content creators getting compensated for their work in various capacities. I think that's something that's always been very important to me. And I think right now we might actually be seeing that it's the right time for it. I feel like a lot of limitations that we've had for the last number of years has been very like technical limitations that we're just not able to overcome. So there is a need for the infrastructure to kind of achieve certain level for us to be then able to build on top. There are other, kind of social file style platforms, but Farcaster is the one that I am on, and I definitely would really like to kind of, instead of running workshops that talk about how to run social media and examples of Twitter, I would like to use examples of Farcaster if I can.
So what do you think they did right when it comes to community building and basically building their brand? Because they've been around for a while, but like not many people use it until very recently.
Building that kind of early stage community, again, it's a process that takes quite a bit of time, but you really have to pick your battles when it comes to knowing who to target and who you do not want to be part of your community. So one of the things that I think the Farcaster did really well is getting a lot of people who became very vocal about the community, but they also have a certain level of experience, expertise, and are also people who are very well kind of respected in Web3. So creating that early stage seed community of sort of OGs that are not just like unknown accounts, but they're people who really are.
That's Vitaly always popping in my feed.
Yeah.
Vitaly calls the podcaster.
Yeah, no, it's so funny because recently there was some. I think Vitalik said something that he was leaving Twitter or something. Or no, somebody else made a post. I think it was Outlier Capital. They made a post that Vitalik is leaving Twitter for Farcaster, and they just bashed him for it or something like that. And then Elon commented underneath, "Why did he leave?" So that actually became like a huge meme on Farcaster. People started to create a channel and started talking, "Why did he leave? Why did he leave? Why did he leave?" It was just really, really funny. So I think there's a lot of signals there that are, just like that. Why wouldn't he? The entirety of Twitter has become so much worse when it comes to spam. And it's so funny to me that Elon has been trying to solve the spam problem, and he keeps talking about how he's going to solve bots by making people pay, and nothing happens and everything gets even worse. So one of the kind of engagement strategies that I would teach founders is make sure that you're always replying. So if you have, let's say, people that you want to kind of keep in touch with on Twitter, and you have people that, are perhaps certain like KOLs, influencers, add them to specific lists. And instead of engaging with For You feed, be very targeted at who you're engaging with, engage only with those lists. Goal with the first list is for you to convert these people into your followers, into your community members. With the second list is that you want to be present in replies of these KOLs so that you can build reputation over time with them. Plus, this is where people hang out because their comment threads are usually quite big. So people just kind of go in there and make their opinions known. Well, there is a level of moderation that's required to make sure that this works. And what started happening on Twitter or X lately is that you will go into the KOL's replies and it's all spam garbage. It's just the entire kind of reply like the element of moderation is just looks like it's missing. So I'm not sure exactly what decisions led to that, but there's a lot of people just going into those threads and essentially farming engagement. Why are they doing this? Because it has a knockoff effect of them not being able to get engagement somewhere else. So all that entire cycle needs to be managed at all different ends of the spectrum. Otherwise, you're going to ruin the network. And this is essentially what happened. Well, going back to our question, why did Vitalik leave or said that he, was not going to be as active there, is because you can imagine the level of scams that go on his comments. Like, anytime he posts, there's probably a whole bunch of different accounts trying to farm engagement using his comment thread. And then on top of that, sharing, malicious links or various different things. So that is something that, needs to be solved, because otherwise people who have a certain level of engagement on these platforms, they're not really going to be happy with this. As I'm sure they like to go to their comment threads and kind of contribute to a sort of certain level of discussion and not just be blasted by spam. So that is my little spiel on like what's going on with X and Twitter. But going back to platforms like Farcaster, I think the founders and the engineers have done a tremendous job managing levels of spam, because I'm sure they get a lot of that. So them being able to kind of moderate that and curate things in a way that they have been it's very commendable. And that also comes to sort of the level of kind of camaraderie and community that people are feeling there. So I think that they started with quite small with some of those early stage community members, but they were able to kind of give them certain level of ownership of their communities through some strategic decisions that they've made when it comes to the design of the app itself. So having things like channels that, you can moderate yourself, a little bit more kind of like Reddit style system, when you have subreddits and you have somebody who's able to moderate those kinds of feeds. So giving community the ownership over these channels and giving them also certain levels of incentives, I think that has been proven really, really good. And I also think just giving them access to be able to take the brand in the direction that the community members want and they feel like really strongly connected to. I think that has been like working really well for them. However, that being said, like the most recent kind of explosive growth when it comes to Farcaster came from a couple things. There's the Degen token that has been launched. I feel like that is something that's quite a success story that has been going a bit crazy. And then on the other side is the sort of the frame feature. For anybody who doesn't know, frames are essentially like an interactive piece of content within the Farcaster feed. So instead of making a post where the only thing that you can do is to click on the post and read it or look at the image or a video, you can now interact. So you can do like little games and little experiences within the Farcaster feed, and that has created a lot of good sort of value proposition for developers, because what developers are always missing is this sort of they always facing this cold start problem where in order to get some sort of community for their application, people need to go out of their way to then find an application. Whereas if you can serve them as sort of like a mini app through the feed that they're already consuming, in this case a Farcaster feed, then you're able to kind of, again, try things out and bring your product to market as soon as possible. So that is one of the reasons why I think it had such a huge impact on that community. And this is nothing like totally revolutionary or new. For those who remember, Facebook had some features of that sort where they were able to give developers access to their APIs, and then they were able to kind of use that. And I'm sure we all remember getting all of a sudden like million notifications for Farmville or something like that and being like, what the hell is this, right? Everybody was playing, and developers got access to that usership through the Facebook feed. Essentially, first they did, then they made a decision to cut everybody out from that perspective, and then they made a decision that I was talking about, which is cut out publishers from the platform, and they just became much more kind of like closed off ecosystem. So I think that having platforms that take the opposite approach, where like you have the protocol and then you have the client, and you're able to kind of always offer certain level of experience, even if the client does not support it for various strategic reasons. You can always create your own application front end eventually. I think that it will allow developers to be much more confident with this type of platform. So that is my little spiel about Farcaster. And also, I don't know if you have another question or if that was clear, because there's quite a few like proprietary terms like frames and different things that I feel like maybe some people don't know.
I think we should definitely jump on a Twitter space together sometimes very soon, like continue the conversation when it comes to Farcaster, because
Sure.
I think that'll be something very interesting for myself and for a lot of people as well, a lot of marketers, but not only. And to kind of try to wrap up this episode soon-ish, but not before. We took two questions from the audience. One of them was regarding like the experience that you think is important for a marketer, like their previous Web2 experience into Web3. I can quote, but I'm not sure. We can maybe try to understand together what they meant. Some say it's relevant, meaning like the Web2 experience into Web3. Others that it's a marketer without Web3 experience isn't worth their salt, as the mechanisms and people are different. What do you think about that? I've heard this a lot of times because a lot of people told me like, oh, how Web3 is so much different. I'm like, no, it is, but it's not at the same time. So I don't know what you think about that.
I have kind of mixed feelings about this one, because it is a very interesting, nuanced question in the sense that it really is on case by case basis, depending on the stage of the project, the type of the project, and what they're really trying to do. So it's something that is, I almost kind of have a hard time with giving a blanket statement on, because I think that it just really is dependent on who you're hiring for what role exactly. I think that there's absolutely a place for people who have only sort of Web 2 marketing experience in Web 3. I think there's a lot of very talented marketers that absolutely understand how to market products, and Web 3 did not invent everything that has to do with marketing. That being said, there are certain different Web 3 marketing strategies that can enhance your sort of experience. So if you're not, as a marketer, open to that and open to learning about that, it can be a little bit detrimental, because part of the reason why they're so effective is because they're kind of like essentially growth hacking strategies, where they can bring a huge levels of engagement into the project. But you have to understand what you're doing in order to achieve that, right? So it is more sort of case dependent. I would definitely not say anything against Web 2 marketers entering Web 3 with no prior Web 3 experience. I think it's enough that you're just educating yourself in kind of the tenets of the technology and figuring out what it is that is drawing you towards the space, and having a strong marketing background, I think, can only enhance your experience. And another thing that is driving me crazy to no end is the flip side of this. When you have a lot of founders that are almost treating marketers as if they don't really know anything, or they just don't understand because they're not a Web3 marketer. And I just look at it and I'm like, why do you have so much hubris that you think that Web3 invented everything? You know what I mean? It is, at the end of the day, the same kind of situation where you need to understand how you're telling your story. You need to understand your narrative. You need to know how to create relationships and build them with other people, and working kind of in synergy. And I think that having sometimes very early stage projects have this idea of having this marketer, when I said earlier, a jack of all trades. They just think that they bring this one person, they are going to be able to do everything. When you're an early stage startup, essentially that's kind of what you want, because they're going to have to pick up slack. But as you grow on the marketing team, people have very specialized roles and very specialized experience. And this is why sometimes things go unnoticed for the longest time, because you will have a team producing all this content and why aren't we getting any traction? Well, if you're just producing content and that's all you're doing, then you're essentially sharing your things into a void. What are your channels? What is you're using? What are the tools that you're using to track things? I think that that's very important to kind of understand that most of the time companies that have are at different levels of scale, they have quite a few people that specialize in these different areas of marketing, and they all work in synergy. So I think sometimes there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of how marketing teams operate, because in my opinion, marketing teams are the most collaborative teams of the bunch. It's so many people that are just working, one person starts and another person finishes. It's like clockwork. So it's like a well sort of oiled machine to get the entire marketing working from sort of the awareness all the way to kind of having somebody signed as an end user, and having them kind of being able to progress through the funnel and understanding every step of the funnel itself, so that you can see how they're progressing, right? You wouldn't see one person managing that for a mid-sized company. This is a process that takes a lot of elements. It takes a huge collaboration, not only from the marketing team itself, but also managing, different people at the company, and, perhaps doing things like content production and getting the entire company involved in sharing thought leadership pieces and things like that. So I really think that the marketing teams are just, in my opinion, amazing. And I absolutely think that having very experienced sort of Web2 marketers, there's absolutely place for them, and I think that some people should have a little bit more respect for that.
Fair. One of the last questions I want to ask you is like, what do you think is the balance of brand storytelling versus translating complex text into consumer-friendly text? I know we already touched on that, like when we were talking about like PR campaigns and stuff, because I do believe that like storytelling is super important for absolutely everybody in the space. But maybe you can give a thought or two about this as well.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I got that first part because you read it quite fast. Can you just read it again?
What's the balance of brand storytelling versus translating complex tech into consumer-friendly text? That's not my question. Is a question from one of the people from the audience. So I want to know what you think about it.
Yeah. I think that the first thing that comes to mind is knowing your audience. So understanding really who you're targeting. I think it's important to make things as accessible as possible, but then people have different levels of accessibility needs. So if you are creating a product that's quite Web3 heavy, but actually it is going to be then used by like a mainstream consumer, and they have a less understanding of tech, for example, in certain capacity, it is really paramount that you are able to communicate this concept as simply as possible. But then you also might have to identify like in what channels those things are absolutely needed, versus maybe there are some different channels where the text can be a little bit more technically heavy and detail oriented, because it is more geared towards perhaps partners that have a little bit more technical understanding, or maybe, in fact, your consumer base is more technically savvy. So I think having really good idea as to who you're targeting with particular pieces of content, I think is absolutely paramount in this kind of situation.
The last question I want to ask you before we wrap this up is kind of like two in one. One of the questions that we got from the audience, it's a question also that I'm also asking all my speakers as well. How do you basically stay up to date? And where do you get your inspiration? And if you have any resources, tools, anything that you want to share as an educational tool?
Yeah, so when it comes to inspiration, I mean, I feel like I'm
podcaster.
Yeah. Another shout out. I'm just trying to think about like staying like up to date when it comes to like different like information or getting inspired by what's happening in the industry. I think a lot of that happens in sort of like random different groups. I mean, one that I would say is very big for me is obviously, since I work for Outlier, we do have our own Slack channels that, encourage sharing information. So we're always up to date on everything, because there's always somebody that's going to drop whatever's new and happening right now. So I think that having those kinds of sources of information where a lot of people are able to curate the most important elements for you, it's a very good system. That being said, like I understand that not everybody would have access to something like this, but there are, I think, various different Telegram groups or different places that you can join to kind of be a bit more up to date. Or even, if you are a founder, have a couple of different team members, encourage that kind of culture of always having like information sharing. So that's definitely the one place that I've always looked for. Another thing is, people recommending different books. I think that's another thing. I have this like insane list of different things that I'm supposed to read. So I always try to keep taking notes. Sometimes you see these things, on Twitter. Most of the time, these days, I would probably see it much more often on Farcaster. But if somebody's recommending something in a specific area and I'm really interested in, I always make sure to take note and keep track of it. So actually, one of our team members, he's responsible for Outlier research. He recently recommended this book. I have it right here on the shelf, so I'm trying to read the title. So it's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. So that's what I'm going to try to read next, because I feel like it's really interesting. And the name of the author is Shoshana Zuboff. So I think she's a powerhouse when it comes to those very interesting topics. So I'm very excited to read this book. But yeah, I just I feel like also another thing that I find quite funny. There's basically the only Web3 marketing book that have gotten published, which is Amanda Cassatt's Web3 Marketing. So I was recently joking that, if I had $1 for every time I recommended this book and somebody actually bought it, I need to start getting kickback, because I've been recommending this book for quite a lot of people. I feel like it's a very interesting, especially for people who are trying to manage like infrastructure projects and figuring out, how to market. I think it's very important to read, because she talks a lot about the importance of kind of identity and giving people something that they feel like they're owners of in creating communities. So I think that those tips are very, very important for founders in Web3, which, they quite resonated with me, and they seem to resonate with a lot of founders that I talk to. So those are some of the sort of levels of inspiration and kind of where I look for them. But now when it comes to tools, I think I've mentioned quite a few things, like, Farcaster and the frames and different things that allow you to do a little bit of a sort of Web3 marketing in like a more sort of Web3 native type of way. I'm a big fan of things like open mints and, trying to get the community riled up that way, and then making sure that you can retarget their wallets for various different things. And so those types of things. But maybe I should give a shout out a little bit to some of the AI tools, because I feel like when it comes to tools, AI has been crushing it, and it's definitely like one of my favorite things to help myself out with, because we all have so much work, and sometimes it's very hard to keep track. So using AI note takers is pretty much daily for me. Same as, using Notion AI to like revise my notes, or even jumpstart certain paragraphs and revise certain things. I would even do things like write an article and have AI shred it for me. Just please tell me like what is terrible, about it, what can be developed further. I think it's a big kind of component to learn also how to kind of prompt and filter the output, and remember that it's never, it's not 2 + 2 = 4 kind of situation. It's open to interpretation, all those results. So you do have to put it through your common sense filter as well, but it's very helpful in that capacity. And another tool that I really like using is Gamma.app. That's it's a tool for creating presentation with AI. And so, when you're doing certain workshops or different presentations, I was able to input basically kind of like the look and feel of the entire presentation. Now all my slides look always on brand with Outlier, which I'm really happy about. So I don't have to spend like extra time, making my presentations look pretty. They just always look pretty by default because AI made it so.
This sounds awesome. The last question I want to ask you is, can you tell the audience where can they find you?
You can find me on Farcaster. So I'm on Farcaster as Eunika.eth, my NS, or on Twitter as Eunika_SOT. Yes. And that's probably where you're most likely to find me.
Eunika, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure. I feel like anybody would find a ton of really cool info from this episode. And I am looking forward to be doing a Twitter space with you pretty soon. So maybe we'll talk about it after this episode. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day, and looking forward to speaking to you soon.
For sure. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to our Out of Ordinary podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to hear more content like this, then open up the podcast app and click on the follow or subscribe button. It takes less than 5 seconds and is the single best thing you can do to support the show and stay up to date to more marketing strategies that are being used in the Web3 space.